If there's one thing you know about me, of the mundane type themes, I love railroads, right? I love all sorts of
Oh, really? What's your favorite 18xx game?
Excuse me? Anyway, I love all sorts of train games, all of them, like all different types, to where they're just so much fun, to where they're...
Poser. Probably doesn't know what a stock round is.
All right, fine. Listen, here's the deal. That's true. I've never played an 18xx game before this review. And understand something. I love train games. I love the idea of 18xx games, but I was a little scared to dip my toe into the whole system. Now, first and foremost, I am going to do an overview of the rules of 1830, which covers a lot of 18xx games, but if you really want one, Ambi does a good job showing you how to play 1830. There's several other videos of how to play other 18xx games. Go watch those, because you hear this phrase, and I was scared at first. You hear this phrase, 18xx, you think it's a genre that you can't even get it, like I can't even get into that genre, too much of a barrier to entry. Well, you would be wrong. Now, we're going to look at 1830. Now, I'm looking at the Avalon Hill edition, not the Lookout version. Although, if I still get my hands on it, you know where to go. Hook me up. I'll make a little deal with you. Anyway, taking a look at 1830. This is the one that came out in 1986. Started, pretty much as far as I can tell, research-wise, this really started the genre of 18xx, which is a system of train games based on 18. And the XX is kind of like Mega Man when it's like based in the year 20XX. Basically, you fill in the blanks. So it could be 1830, 1842, 18AL, which is 18, it's the 18XX system for Alabama, 18MX for Mexico, 18CZ. There's all sorts of ones, but 1830 was kind of the one that started everything. Pretty straightforward rules, albeit they have some slippery bits that you got to learn and make sure that you know. The game is very, very intense, even though it's just about stocks and building trains. But it's kind of like, I drink your milkshake sort of deal. I mean, even though that was about oil and their blood, obviously. But more so, that whole railway robber baron. Think Mr. Durant of the Union Pacific in Hell on Wheels. But alas, I've talked enough. As we start this preamble, let's get into the nuts and bolts of what 1830 is. Then we'll come back up and talk final thoughts at the end. So, railways and robber barons, check that out. Even this builds character to me, having those rough spots on the board, on the box. So I really love that. Anyway, Avalon Hill Company, 1986. And whoever sent me this version when I got it from them, it had the game catalog still from what you can get from Avalon Hill in 1986. These are your train charters or your company charters. These are how you're going to play each person. I would say 1830 and 18X games are interesting because you don't play a character, you play someone investing in all these different companies. So you're not the red trains, you're investing in this certain company. Now, there's paper money, and let me slide out the things that kind of slipped out of the way when I was putting this back up. But you got paper money, that's, give or take. You can live without that or with that if you want. You can switch it to poker chips. You have all these station tiles or track tiles. We'll show you those in a moment. The actual things to mark the individual companies, private companies, and then shares, and then here's the actual board. I wanted to get this out and show you here. All right, so here is 1830 laid out somewhat. Now, here's the thing. We've got all the shares laid out up there, the different trains here. I've also got some tracks to let you know. Like, I'm not going to show you how to play the game full stop, every rule. Watch Ambi's video for that. She does a great job with that. But there are two phases in the game. There are phases of the stock phase and the operations round. So stock round, operations round. There's also a separate auction that happens at the beginning of the game to buy some private companies, and the little private companies will give you income for a little while, but also will typically come with a bonus until they close and incorporate inside of a bigger, major corporation, which are done by these charters here. Now, the difference between this and a normal train game is you're not going to play like the red player, and you'll put all your red trains out like you normally would if you look down here and saw this, and you're playing like Age of Steam. No. You're all going to be vying as investors in these different major corporations, and whoever's the president of that corporation will make the decisions for that train company that round, including laying track and running trains and getting stuff. So on the stock round, you're going to have the option on your turn to share as many shares of one stock as you want, or buy one single share of a stock that you want. So the first share has to be 2, because you become the president with 2 shares. You have the majority stockholder. When you buy 2 shares, you set the par value, which is the amount of money that's always going to sell from the IPO. That's this initial offering here. If you set it at $67, for instance, you would pay $134 because it's 2 shares at $167. No matter what the actual market value of that stock is later in the game, if there are some left in the IPO, you can still buy them for the par value. Now, however, if they're in the bank pool, you have to buy them for the current stock price, which could be much more or much less than what they are initially offered at. That's the stock round. You're going to be doing that over and over. Now, when a company has 6 shares bought by players, it will be floated, and the person with the most shares will take that company charter, and it will take all the tokens and the amount of money with it, which would be 10 times its par value. So it's basically you're floating that company and fully investing it. So 10 times 10 shares at $6 or $67 is $670, all the way up to $1,000. Into that company, and that company will use that, not personal money, that's a different thing. Your personal money is how you win the game. The train company money, the railroad company money, is what you're going to use to purchase track if you have to pay some of the fees listed on the board, as well as buying trains and running trains. It's all about getting better equipment for that company so that you can score more money for your company on the term. So once you've done that and we go to operations round, if you have a company floated, you can start laying tiles. Now initially you're going to have to start with these, well initially you actually start with the initial tile of one of these companies. So let's just say you have the Canadian Pacific, it starts up here, right here. So you would have to build into one of these two. Now this one can only be built on by the person who owns this, or the corporation that owns this minor corporation. So if you had bought that from the beginning and you had bought Canadian Pacific, you could start building straight into this with these special tiles that you would need. But for our sake, let's just say we're gonna build across here. So this is $80 to build into that square because you have to cross a river, it's $80. Now, when you run a train, you normally will have to have multiple stops to run a train. So currently we don't have any actual stops. We can start, but we don't have a stop yet. In order to do that, you're going to need, let's just say we ran it across this way then. So this is $80 and we're bypassing that one for now. And then the next turn, because typically you will never be able to really run trains on your first round. So we go back through, do another stock round, then you come back to the operations round. So now, notice you cover this with this. The one rule about laying track is you can never ever destroy a piece of track. You also can't run into gray hexes with open track, and you can't run into water with open track. So now we can run a train here. So the Canadian Pacific person would put one of their tokens out. They would already put it here to show that that's a tile there. You cannot run a train, and basically that just means tracing a route as many as your train value. So if you have a level 2 train, you can run 2 spaces. So this is 1 on that route. And you'll score the money based on every one of these little cities you pass through. So this is 40 and 60. Now, had you had another one here you could go through, you could score the money off that. You have 2 options. You can either keep all of that money into your train company, not your personal money, into the railroad company's funds. If you do that, the stock market value for that corporation goes down 1. If you choose to pay dividends to shareholders, you'll then take that amount. So this is, what did we say? 40 and 20 is 60. Divided by 10. This is 10 shares. That's $6 per share. So if you had 6 shares, you'd get $36. Everybody else would get it. If there's shares up here in the IPO, they don't get anything. However, if there are shares in the bank pool, that railroad company will earn dividends based on how many stocks are in here, which goes back to their personal player money. When you do that, stock value rises when you pay out dividends. Now, you'll notice there are different colored tokens. Those are done based on trains. When the first level 3 train is bought, you can start using green tiles. These green tiles will upgrade those yellow tiles. Again, you can't destroy any track that's there. So if you wanted to upgrade this space, this is not a bad space for it, because now you're starting to get access into that part you looped originally. So now you've upgraded this. It's worth 30 points instead of 20, but you also have given access to more areas because this now has a spot for 2 different railroad company tokens. This normally stops your movement from running a train, but if you had one here, you could keep running through. So now that adds a space for it, as well as it opens up the track. These little dits here, these also count as places you could have stopped. So let's just say now I want to run to this town. So 1, 2, that would be 3 stops because it's 1, 2 with a train. So you'd count all 3 of these places. So 10, 30, and 40, you'd be up to $80. Now, the game is just going to rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Different things will unlock, different things will happen. You'll start opening brown tiles, which again, as long as you keep the rule that you don't destroy any piece of track, you have to upgrade brown from green. But either way, You're going to keep doing this and keep opening stuff up and keep running trains until the bank is broken. Once the bank, all $12,000 of it is broken, the person with the most money wins the game. Or if someone goes bankrupt first, you immediately, they're out of the game, you immediately score. So that's the way you play 1830. There are a lot of little nuanced rules, and there's a lot of things about, selling shares and buying shares. And when you sell down, you could potentially run two companies, and you're able to buy a train from another company, and you set the value. So if what you really wanted to do was float a company at $1,000, basically, you could buy that train from another company for $1,000, which essentially gives this company $1,000 to work with, and that one becomes worthless. And if you sold all your shares off of that, you would gain all the personal income, dropping the price, and whoever the second most person in that company was, give or take a few rules about the amount you can have, would then own a pretty useless corporation. So it's an interesting rule about that. And if you don't have a train, you have to buy a train. If you can't buy a train with company funds, you have to use your funds. So you might get stuck and go bankrupt. Interesting, lots of little tiny nuanced rules like that, but the game is just really exciting to sit down and play. It's long, be ready for that though. So that is 1830. Right, a lot to it. Again, there are tons of videos on this. You can learn how to play the game, how to play all these sorts of games. 18 Chesapeake is on its way to my house currently. You can learn this whole system. Now, I will say, let's talk about pluses. Now, obviously, we're not going to talk about the art of this version because this is from 1986. It's from Avalon Hill. If you sat this next to your copy of Monopoly you had growing up from Parker Brothers, you'd almost not be able to tell the difference between some of the mortgage tiles and some of these stock tiles. So we're not going to talk presentation. If you want to talk presentation, look at the Lookout version. That one does a much better job at looking, and technically, even though they're in the same 18X system, not the same designer, but go look at 18 Chesapeake if you really want to see how one can look and should look in such a beautiful way. So we're not looking at art, but we are looking at presentation. Now, the interesting thing about this is, even if you go get your hands on a copy of 1830, the Avalon Hill version that I've got, everything's laid out. Like, it's all there. Like, you put your trains here, 2 trains, 3 trains, 4 trains, 5 trains, 6 trains, D trains. You put them all on the thing. Here's where you list all the shares. Here's your bank pool. Here's your stock, your par value. It's all really accessible and easy to get to. Now, as far as the packaging, presentation, what you get, the rule book is a little bit old school. It feels like you're reading Twilight Struggle, but without even some of the visual aids. There are no visual aids into this rule book until you get to the back of the book. Now, there's a couple charts that help that tell you, okay, this tile can replace this tile. Those are helpful to have, but they're not always instantly readable. So which is why I highly recommend, before you dive into 1830, go watch multiple videos telling you how to play the game, because there are some small rules that you don't want to get tripped up on. One of my favorite rules to get tripped up on, if you're not careful, is that shares that are offered by the bank, not in the bank pool, but offered by the bank, that you buy at the par value, those do not gain money from dividends on anybody, right? They're just there. But if you've bought a share and then sold it into the bank pool, and then you are running that train and doing dividends, the bank, being in the bank pool, will grant that actual company the money from the dividend. So there's a lot of little tiny rules that sound, well, that's no big deal, it's insignificant. Well, it's a huge deal, because it actually could earn your personal money if you own shares, but it could also earn shares for the company, money for the company, instead of you having to be like, well, I guess I'll sell or I'll hold this back, because then you're still raising the stock value and you're still getting money for your company. Now, again, that's all kind of still mechanics, nuts and bolts. We're going to talk review style right now. Here's the thing. 1830, to me, again, I know if you're getting into this genre, you know this already. 1830, it feels a little bit long because you are doing the same thing, rinse and repeat over and over and over. That's good. That's not a problem. You know the system. But this one, if you're not prepared for it and your friends that you're trying to introduce to aren't prepared for it, it's a little long. But that's not a big deal if you know that going in. But you're talking 4 to 6 hours. However, think of it like the very Euro Twilight Imperium, right? But if you get your hands on like an 18 Chesapeake or something, supposedly that's cut in half. What I do love, though, are the mechanics of this system. I love the idea of buying shares and selling shares and dumping that company onto someone else who has shares, and you absconding with any money by selling all the train value and then getting rid of your shares to where someone else is the president of a pretty much worthless company. Those behind the scenes mechanics are so great. And then plus the actual train running and train mapping and everything on the board, it matters so much which tiles you put where. And that is so cool. I love how nuts and boltsy this game is, how you have to think through everything. Even those stock rounds, you think, well, I need to sell some shares, even though I kind of like the dividends I'm getting, but I need some money right now. I love the feeling of that. I think the stock market portion of this game, and this is partially why these games are so popular, that stock market is untouchable in most other games out there. It's just there aren't many systems that do it so well. So I say all that to say this. You know what presentation looks like. We've talked about that. The mechanics themselves, you've seen how to play. If that's for you, if it's a train game you like, this one's probably for you. However, just know you're in for a lengthy play. If that doesn't scare you off, by all means, go find you a copy of 1830. It is absolutely mind-blowing how good this system is. So, I mean, it's obvious. You should know this already, possibly. I shouldn't say you, but people typically know this when they find, wait, why are there so many 18xx games? Well, clearly they've got a following. I highly recommend this. I'm in the rabbit hole now. I'm not going to go all the way deep down because nobody I play with is going to want to play for 6 hours, but I really have a feeling I can get some of those, the ones that are about 3 hours, get those under our belt and play them. But I'm excited about this system. I love it. Again, there's tons of videos that talk about this already. But at the end of the day, summarize this review. Looks, unless you get the lookout version. Plays phenomenally. Plays long, plays phenomenally. The stock market is unbeatable when it comes to other games. You will not find another game system that does stock marketing this good, in my opinion. And then the actual experience itself is pretty quick. You do feel like you don't get lost in it very much. It's not like in Twilight Imperium, another lengthy game where you're like, oh, good, we're rolling along. Oh, y'all are about to have a fight for 6 hours. The only thing that can really slow you down from the experience is if, for instance, you're running two companies and you have the first one in the player order and the last one in player order. So that means that there's 7 trains that are going to run in between you. But that doesn't take that long once you start getting into it. So I highly recommend 1830, even if not just for the experience of the scoffers. Even if not just for the experience of that, of just getting to say, you know what, I tried it, I'm out, I tried it, I love it, I'm in. That's 1830. I'm Bryan Drake here on the Dice Tower. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, etc. at Dice Tower Bryan. Until next time, we'll see you.